We have just had celebrated Lag BaOmer, a time that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva ceased from passing away. And on this day, the Arizal teaches us that Rabbi Akiva went along and gave smicha to the 5 Talmidim, his 5 future pupils, which were the ones that are going to be passing on Torah to the next generation. Of them was the famous Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. To say a few words of one of the novelties that we live off, that we are taught by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. The Gemara teaches us an interesting machloket. The Gemara asks a contradiction between 2 verses. On the one hand, we find that the Torah writes, Va'asafta deganecha. We are taught in the Shema that a person should gather in the produce. He should have some form of hishtadlut, a means, ways, in order to feed himself, his family, etc. On the other hand, the Torah writes, in Tanakh it says, Lo yamosh sefer haTorah hazeh mipicha, that we should not forsake the Sefer Torah, the words of Torah from our mouths. We should be constantly immersed in learning Torah. Ask the Gemara contradiction. Are we meant to be constantly learning, or should we also be involved in earning a parnasah, v'asafta deganecha, ensuring that we have with what to live off? So the Gemara brings an argument amongst the Tanaim how to understand and reconcile these 2 psukim. Rabbi Ishmael learns it's no contradiction. Really, in essence, a person should be learning Torah day and night. However, what needs to be done to be taken off from that learning of Torah, or alongside the learning of Torah, a person needs to ensure that he, his family, have the sustenance, the means with what to live off. Therefore, says Rabbi Ishmael, Hanheg bahem minhag derech eretz. Whilst learning Torah, a person should also be involved in doing some form of hishtadlut, some form, a means of parnasah, in order to feed his family. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai disagrees, and he says like this. He says that when the Torah writes Va'asafta deganecha, that's talking about in not the ideal situation. The ideal situation is Lo yamosh sefer haTorah hazeh mipicha, that a person should be learning, living Torah day and night, and not doing any hishtadlut, any form of means of earning a parnasah. And a person can rely on that way of life, and if a person is doing totally the will of Hashem, and what will be regarding the needs for parnasah and physicality, he writes that melachtam na'asit al yedei achirim. The necessary means that a person normally needs, Hashem will provide through other channels. It'll be done through others. He'll be on a spiritual, elevated plane that people will even feel a merit, a zchut, to support such a person. If we can imagine of the great people, the dignitaries, personalities of Klal Yisrael, Chaim Kanievsky or Eliashiv, or people of such stature, it'd be a privilege for a person to be able to be the one to provide for such a great Torah personality. Says Reb Shimon Bar Yochai that a person can totally rely on Hashem, the melachta na'asit al yedei achirim. Because Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says, how can it be if a person is involved in parnasah, he'll have to do the plowing of the field, putting the seeds in, cutting the field, cutting the produce, winnowing, making the bread. There's going to be no time left for learning Torah. The pasuk of Asafta Deganecha, says Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, that's referring to a situation when a person is not totally immersed in the learning of Torah. As Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the Gemara says, Bizman she'en Yisrael osim retzono shel makom, if we are not totally doing Hashem's will, then the rule applies v'asafta deganecha, that a person has to take the necessary means to provide, to implement parnasah for his household. The Gemara doesn't say where Reb Shimon Bar Yochai got his opinion from, but we do know the famous story that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was the one that spoke out, although privately, but his word got leaked out to the Roman authorities, and he's mentioned that what the Romans are doing, they only do it for their own sake, for their own good. It's not for the Jews, although this may say they're making bridges and they're making markets for the Jews. It's for their own purposes. His words got leaked to the Roman authorities and they were after him. He went into hiding and his wife would bring him food and with his son. But even that, with time, he got scared that they may find his wife and they may force her to reveal his hideout. So he decided to run away and totally conceal his hideout. He went into a cave with his son without any form or way of being able to physically survive. And Hashem miraculously made a carob tree grow next to the cave and a spring of water. And with that, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was sustained for 13 years that he was hiding in the cave when he was writing the Zohar HaKadosh. Here, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, he himself depicted his opinion that when a person is totally doing the will of Hashem, Hashem will provide for him through miraculous ways. People will come along and help him. In his situation, Hashem came along, created a carob tree, a spring of water. The Gemara does not teach us who the halacha is ruled like, whether Rabbi Ishmael or Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. It is not clear. And the Gemara itself does not conclude. All what the Gemara tells us after this machloket between Rabbi Ishmael and Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, that Abaya teaches us, Harbe asu Rabbi Ishmael. Many people did in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Ishmael that alongside learning Torah, one should ensure to feed his family, to make sure that a person can have a way of living. And they were successful in this mahalach, in this approach, in this way of leading their lifestyle. They would learn many, many hours a day, and alongside they would take off time to do what was necessary for their family. The Gemara also writes that many people did like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, however, they were not successful. It is not an approach, a way for the general public. In other words, there are individuals, the Gemara says that many did like it, but they weren't successful. But the Sfarim tell us, however, that's for the general public. However, there are those that can live an elevated lifestyle, totally immersed in Torah, in Avodat Hashem, in the service of Hashem, and they can be on a plane, on a level that malachtam na'asit al yedei acherim. What's necessary for them to be able to have the means, Hashem will provide for them. It would seem from this Gemara, where Abaya concludes that many people did like according to Rabbi Ishmael, that's what we should do. Whereas the many that did like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and were not successful, therefore that's not the right approach. And seemingly that is the ruling, as we find in the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Nun Vav, the Shulchan Aruch, from a different point of view and from a different source, not based on the Machloket of Rabbi Shema and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but rules that after a person has prayed Shachrit, has gone to learn, he should go along and ensure that he has some business, he has some way of bringing in Parashat, what is necessary to provide for his family. Having said that, the Mishnah Berurah still quotes that there are those individuals that can elevate themselves to a higher level of lifestyle, an elevated spiritual lifestyle where they are totally immersed in Torah, and Hashem will most certainly provide for them. And the Mishnah Berurah writes, as we find, that Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, although the Gemara writes that many did like him and were not successful in implementing such a lifestyle, says the Mishnah Berurah, that's because that's not a general rule for the public. However, people that want to, that feel the urge and the surge and have the willpower to totally dedicate their life to Torah, dedicate their life to Hashem, learning, most certainly they have the right to dedicate their lifestyle to such an approach. And it's further supported by a Rambam, as the Mishnah Berurah writes. The Rambam writes that although we find that Shevet Levi, the tribe of Levi, they were the ones right from the onstart, this tribe of the 12 tribes, they never were involved in work in Egypt, they never were involved in the servitude, they were always sitting learning Torah. And the tribe of Levi, they excelled. They were the ones that ruled the halacha, they were the Torah learners. And the Rambam writes, it's not necessarily today Shevet Levi, not you have to be a descendant of Levi, but any person that takes on to be like one of those Levites, to dedicate his life, he has the right and the source of his actions to do so is Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, to dedicate his life totally to Hashem. It would seem there's a difference between Shevet Levi and Shevet Yisachar. We know that Yisachar were also learned, and they had a pact with their partners, Zvulun, that Zvulun would go to work and they would provide for Yisachar, which is also a different approach, another way, which is also ruled in Halakha, till today, of supporting Torah, that Zvulun have the privilege to be the supporters of the Torah, which plenty yeshivot, plenty individuals work with Yisachar, Zvulun. However, there seems to be a difference between Shevet Levi and Shevet Yisachar. Although they were both learning Torah, by Shevet Yisachar, they had a plan. They were supported. Zvulun came along and offered them a partnership. Shevet Levi was on par, the same as Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. It was without a plan. They totally pushed off any calculations, any motives, any reasonings, any ideas of how and what and how they're going to be able to support themselves, their family. And they totally relied on Hashem. And people of such a spiritual level, Hashem most certainly will provide for them. They are elevated like the Aron in the Kodesh HaKodashim, that although we know that the measurements of the Kodesh HaKodashim and the Aron was inside it, but the Aron didn't take up any time, any measurements, any physical, there was no physical boundaries to it. A person that elevates himself to be an Aron HaKodesh, to be totally a learned person, steeped, immersed in learning, he can and he will. And as we see till this very day, the world of Torah, Baruch Hashem, is growing. People really want to have a hand, a partnership, an ability to be able to be part of Torah. Today we realize, we know that there's nothing else There's no other way. Our education system must be with the values, with the ethics, with the morals of Torah. That's the way us as a nation will carry on. The Torah is what makes us Jewish. We are not Jewish because of a nationality. We are not Jewish because we live in a certain place and we are a group together. We are Jewish because we accepted the Torah at Sinai. The world was created and is constantly run with the Torah, with the learning of Torah. That is our core existence, our claim to existence, our continued merit to exist as a nation. And when we learn Torah, it gives more energy, life, support to our nation. It keeps us going. It keeps our enemies away. And we should all merit, whether those people that are involved in going with the halacha according to Rabbi Ishmael, and with those people that want to take on a higher elevated way of life, that feel that they can push and they can be on the pathways of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, together as a nation, in unity, we should all see the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.